right. Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. And welcome to Episode 8 of Talks with V. We are streaming here live with the HBCU Lounge Network. And welcome to the show. This evening, our conversation is going to be about trauma and attachments. And we have friend, school psychologist, and here with us today, Miss Nola Sanders. And so happy to, to see her. I haven't seen her in years since high school, and very proud of who she's become. And she is totally just giving back with her profession. And so we are going to learn a lot from her today. So thank you so much for joining us, Nola.
Thank you. And I have to reciprocate everything you just said. I'm very proud of who you've become. And yes, I'm ready to get started with this great conversation.
Yes, ma'am. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been in your profession and what exactly it is that uh, motivated you to get into psychology.
Okay, well, I'm a school psychologist. I'm going into my seventh year. I work for a large school district in California. I'm currently at the middle school that I attended when I was in middle school. So it's kind
Oh,
of a
wow.
full circle kind of moment. Um, I was always motivated to be a psychologist. If you ask my mom, it was either lawyer or psychologist.
Oh, okay.
So even back in like high school days, even back in elementary school days, I do remember people asking me for advice and always being kind of the voice of reasoning in very
Hmm.
excitable conversations between teenagers. So
Right.
I've just kind of had that in my bones, and it's only natural that I became a school psychologist eventually. So I really do love my job. Um, there's a lot of heavy moments, but there's a lot of really fulfilling moments. So I really
Definitely.
enjoy what I do.
Absolutely. I can see how that can, happen, but you always have to have that friend. There's always that friend that, is like your voice of reason, either you have, because, you're going to have your variety of friends. You got the friend that's, hot headed and they're just like, somebody better calm
Hmm.
me down because I'm about to go off. And then you got the friend that has issues with the boundaries. And so they just let people
Hmm.
run all over them, walk all over them. And they need that person that's like, hey, you gotta, I know they're your friends or they're your family, and you feel like you can't, say anything, but you're gonna need
Hmm.
to because those boundaries are important. So we are lucky that you decided to go that route, and so are all those. I'm sure all the students and the teachers. And so, tell us a little bit about that because I think a lot of times people believe that when they hear school psychologists, they're thinking like you only help the students, but that's not the case, right?
Oh, no, it's certainly not. So, the school psychologist only assesses the students. So, one part of my job that often gets overlooked is that I do IQ tests and cognitive and
Mm.
memory tests and learning academic tests, processing tests. I do all of these things for individualized education plans. So, a
Wow.
student who has special education services will typically have an individualized education plan to provide services for whatever disability they have. So
Mm.
that's the only thing I do specifically with students. Now, an assessment
Wow.
entails a lot of things. Not only do I do those standardized measures like IQ tests, but I go observe them. I do interviews with their parents and with them and get to know them in a really holistic way and
Mhm.
find ways to support them. But
Mhm.
also, students are not in a vacuum, right? They have family members, they have teachers,
Right.
they have all of these other people. Um, so I do work to create services and connect them to community services to provide help for their families. Because sometimes parents need counseling too, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes family therapy is necessary. So it's kind of up to you to kind of suss out where the needs are with each individual student and by
Right.
proxy their family. In addition, teachers, administrators, it's a really tough time, especially during the pandemic. This job
Yeah,
isn't
that's I
easy
was
to
just gonna
have.
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do find myself providing a lot of social emotional support to parents, staff, principals, whatever. Because it's tough out there, and sometimes people just need someone to vent. So, as a school psychologist, you wear a ton of different hats, and you're just kind of wearing the hat that you need for that given moment.
In that moment. Yeah, That's awesome. Yeah. And I really wanted to touch on that because I know that that's just the assumption. And
Hmm.
I didn't even know that it was just, just that portion of it is with the students. And then everything else is everyone else that, affects the students, essentially their
Right.
parents, their family, their teachers, And so, and I know that that's, with the pandemic, it was really hard because there was all these changes for parents, for the teachers, and for the students. I mean, I know some of the students were
Hmm.
probably loving it because they probably felt like they weren't, being challenged as much. And you know how kids are with school, they're like, ugh, I didn't learn anything, they're just like, I'm just glad
Hmm.
I'm done, And so, you're not, I mean, they're not getting the attention that they need, during the pandemic for the most part. And so I know the kids are probably like, that's cool, but I'm sure that they're affected, by it.
Yeah.
But the parents and those teachers, like the things I've heard, during the pandemic, how these parents are just like, I'm just going to tell the truth. I don't really want to be around my kids all day long.
Hmm. It's true. And it's interesting because us as older, and I say older, 30 and older, we had
Mhm.
some, when we were coming up, we had a lot of face to face interaction. There wasn't a lot of stuff
Right,
online. So when the
right,
pandemic hit and we didn't have access to that face to face interaction, it really affected us. Whereas
right,
kids under 30, they have social media, they have all of
right.
these things, and there wasn't much of a difference. Yeah, they couldn't see them in person, but a lot of their interactions were through text and other mediums anyway.
Right.
So
Right.
the kids were more resilient, I found, throughout this whole thing than the parents.
Yeah. See, that's interesting. Well, I want to go ahead and jump into the topic. But last show, about 2 weeks ago, we discussed I mean, me before we, and that was challenging. I mean, it's a challenging thing, but I think that with the trauma, unresolved trauma and also those attachments, that can make it a little bit more difficult for some to work on themselves, the me before we. And so,
Mm.
I love to give definitions before we get started because I think it's so important. A lot of times we hear a word and we think one thing because we heard someone else say it for so long and don't really, understand what it means. So, what does trauma mean? So, it says it's an injury such as a wound to a living tissue caused by an extrinsic agent. And then the second definition is a disordered psychic or behavioral state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress or physical injury. And so, that lets you know, okay, there's that physical trauma to your body trauma that's causing all these different issues, probably pretty much with your health, like physically. And then there is that, emotional, that, kind of like that,
Hmm.
those invisible scars, which
Hmm.
I think a lot of times people, because they don't know what it means, and also the things that are invisible are overlooked. So I think I was watching something. They were talking about an invisible organization is the most dangerous. It was something about like politics and like all the scandals, and they were just saying that an invisible organization is the most dangerous one because there's no trace, no physical trace. And we as people, a lot of times we rely. I guess it's kind of like lazy a little, I don't know, but we kind of rely on like the fact, oh, I see it, so it's real. Oh, I see it, so now it's an issue. But if I don't see it, I ignore it and just be like, and that's a problem because of the effects that it has, on us, and the trauma, that it leaves behind, right? And so, the next definition is attachment, and that one says affection, fondness, or sympathy for someone or something. And so my question was, okay, so what is this? What's the connection between the two? So I'm going to read that and then we'll go ahead and get into the questions. So it says that trauma and attachment experience impacts our relationship. So it says childhood trauma often has a significant impact on the child's development of attachment, especially traumas that stem from caregiver relationships. These experiences in early relationships can lead children to learn that their needs will not be met. How many adults? How many adults
Hmm.
still feel that way, like secretly, like, or they have trust
Yes.
issues because of something that may happen in their childhood, someone let them down, uh,
Hmm.
because this results in developing an insecure style of attachment. So, so
Yes.
let's talk about that. If you can share some insight on trauma and the impact on our attachment styles.
Yes. Okay. So first, I want to expand on your definition of trauma. You had a great
Yes.
definition of trauma. And I can say over the years, I've gone through a ton of trainings, and every
Yes.
single training defines trauma differently at the beginning.
Right.
So I want to read to you. I'm going to look down a little because I want to read this. I thought this was one of the best that I've come across so far. So trauma is defined as the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness, or
Mm,
diminishes their sense of self and their ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. So it's more
mm,
about the response to the trigger rather
right.
than the trigger, and it's very subjective. So when we're talking about definitions of trauma, it's all about the individual response. So that's why
Right.
I'm sure even in your research, if you were researching for this
Yeah.
topic, when you
I
in
love what
trauma,
you
I'm sure
gave
there were
because it's more
there's a
on it.
ton of different
Yeah.
definitions. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's more about the inability to cope with that and the things that we do after the trauma, right?
Mm,
And so when we're talking about attachment styles, so
mhm,
the link between the two, they overlap a lot. They overlap almost all the time, but they are two
mm,
separate concepts. So,
right.
attachment is just connectedness to human beings,
Mm,
and when we talk about attachment styles, excuse me, we talk about um, attachment styles in our romantic relationships. But most people, when they find out what their attachment style is, they see that behavior or those behaviors related to that attachment style that they have,
mhm,
they are manifested in all different relationships, their work
mhm,
relationships, their friendships, and everything. So
right.
to go back to what you were saying, different trauma or different experiences during the developmental period will
Mhm,
definitely lead you to exhibiting certain behaviors in adulthood and in your relationships, like I just mentioned. So,
mhm.
so a student, I'm sorry, a student. See, I'm already in school mode, but a
Right.
person who has problems with attachment styles and they don't know how to navigate in that world, and people who have problems with trauma, they usually have problems with anxiety and depression. Those are
Right.
the two ways that they're usually manifested. So not only does it affect the way that we interact with each other in the future, but it affects just the way that we view ourselves and how we take care of ourselves and different mental disorders that we may have. So
Right.
they're very inextricably linked. In the 50s and 60s, there were a ton of different experiments that scientists did to see the different ways that the attachment styles manifested in their adulthood. So there's a lot of long-term studies that see that this attachment style is correlated with these behaviors when we get older.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that is it's something. But when you gave that, definition, it's so interesting because that's not the one that really gets shared and what people necessarily like their mind goes to. They think of trauma like, a person maybe who had a child who was in the system, or was abused, like physically. And so I feel like we kind of um don't really consider that there's all these other areas of trauma, and when we do that we're not able to identify that maybe we have some unresolved trauma later on in life, and
Right.
then you're interacting in these relationships and you're projecting, because you haven't dealt with you, and it's a lot of times it's easier to tell everybody else what they need to do and work on, um, instead of reflecting and saying, why do I feel the need that I have to do that? Or what's going on with me?
Right.
Like, why am I feeling, so um, irritable? We'll say that instead of triggered.
There,
So,
that's a good one. That's a good one.
yeah, definitely. So they speak about the different, oh shoot, the different attachment styles. And so if you can share what those are, the different attachment styles.
Yes. So there are four different attachment styles, basically: anxious, secure, avoidant, and then there's a fourth category that's it's a very small portion of the population, and it has a bunch of different names, kind of like the definitions of trauma. So in my studies, it's anxious avoidant, but it's also called ambivalent avoidant, fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant. There's a lot of words and a lot of terms to describe the smallest portion of the population. But most people fall under the first three categories of anxious, secure, and avoidant. So an anxious person loves love.
They had one that said disorganized. Is that one that falls under one of those?
Disorganized is also another. Yes, it's the one that has all these different. Because it's, different fields of studies will give it different names, but it's all describing the same person. So the anxious avoidant person. Actually, I'll start with anxious first. So the anxious person, they love love. They're just romantic people. They love it, but they're very hypervigilant, and they're motivated by avoidance of fear. So this is the person who's always like, why didn't you answer my text? Why didn't you call me back? Well, you're 5 minutes late. What's going on there? They're always like in this constant fear that person's going to leave them. And harkening back to childhood, we're looking at people issues. Yes, exactly. Abandonment issues. Their parents were not consistent with their care. Sometimes they were there to soothe them when they were crying or they needed them. Sometimes they weren't. And, parents have different reasons for that. Sometimes it's work. There's a lot of legitimate reasons why, parents are inconsistent with their delivery of like soothing during a very critical developmental period. But those people tend to be the jealous ones in relationships. They tend to be the one like, let me get your password. They're the ones that send you the paragraph texts. They're the ones that, there are also positives though too. And I want to be very clear about this. When we're talking about these attachment styles, we're not talking about good or bad or negative or positive or healthy or sick. We're talking about variations in the population. That's all we're talking about. Common variations in the population. So somebody who is anxious at their extreme will be that possessive person. And then but the positive is that their head is always on the swivel. They're never going to fall for the okie doke ever. They're not going to fall for it because they're already looking for it. But the downside to that is that person is always looking for danger, and danger, may not be there. So you could be in a relationship with a secure person, but not really trust them, and it's really unfounded. So that's an anxious personality. We can talk more about anxious personalities, or I can continue to kind of break down each of the styles. I don't know how you want to proceed with that.
Yeah, no, let's go proceed with the other styles. I feel like we kind of got an idea. You gave a lot of great examples. We all can identify with some of those experiences. So perfect. Yes. We can move.
Yes, or you have that friend, or you have that somebody, and you're like, whoa, like what's up with this relationship? What's up with this person? So the secure attachment style is like the idealized attachment style, and I think it's unfairly idealized. I think it's the most healthy, but it's not necessarily the best. So people are striving for more secure relationships, but that doesn't mean that that's the ideal. So this person loves intimacy, loves closeness, and they have the resiliency. This is what sets them apart from others. They have the resiliency to understand that like sometimes relationships don't work out, and you might have some heartache, but they have the strength, the inner strength to know that they'll be able to overcome any heartbreak that they may endure in the future with this person. And those are the people who typically like to go on to other relationships. They learn what they learned from the old one, and then they move on. Those are the people, back to childhood, those are the people whose parents were consistent. Every time they cried, every time they needed something, the parent was there and their needs were met. They felt safe. Those are all positives, right? Some of the negatives, though, those people don't have their head on the swivel all the time. And it could be very stressful to be super hypervigilant, but a little bit of hypervigilance is okay, right? So these people don't have it at all. And so they don't pick up on cues. They don't see things that could be threats as threats, like coming home late all the time, or not communicating all the time, or not even picking up on that their parent or their partner is upset with them. They don't really see it as a threat to their relationship. So when we're talking about secure relationships, that's a negative that we think about. So
That's really interesting too, because it makes me think about, relationship. Like once upon a time, I used to take on projects, and then so after getting sick and tired of that, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to date anyone else that's coming from any more wounded pups, like I'm
Not a
like, I'm
wounded
just going
pup.
to, I know I'm ridiculous when it comes to some of these little sayings, but yeah, I was just like, no, I'm going to date only guys that come from a two-parent, healthy household. But what I realized is that in doing that, well, solely that, just looking for only, okay, he's got both of his parents, they're happy, they're still married, blah, 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 all this stuff. Um, just focus on that. I missed how sometimes when you grow up, with the security, um, you take it for granted, and sometimes you
Hmm.
don't really know how your parents got there. So you're just reaping the benefits, and that's how the situation was, with the ex, where he was just used to reaping the benefits and didn't really know like how they got there. So it was just kind of like, oh yeah, I came from this and da da da. My parents, they've been married for 35 years, um, but he didn't know the work that they put in.
Hmm.
And so he didn't know how to put the work in our relationship. And so it was crazy because I was like, well, maybe, when you don't necessarily, when you come from something different, you may work a little harder because
Right.
you want it and you didn't have it. And so it's driving you like, I want this, for my life and for my kids. Whereas if you had it and you were fed with the silver spoon and everything was just good, seemed like all the time, your parents like hid all any stressful conversations from you, then you don't know what to do when the time comes where you have to put in the work. And that's exactly what was
Right.
going on. And I'm sitting here thinking like, your parents have been married forever. Like, you don't know how this happened, like, and
Right.
he was just receiving that benefit, but didn't know what the work looked like, what the work ethic looked like. So I think that's very interesting because you would assume like, okay, secure style, like they're good. They can teach us all.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. I
Yeah.
love that example. That's a perfect example of that. Yes.
Yeah.
They're just not aware of the deficits. They don't know, like you said, all the work, all of the cooperation, all of the, I
Yeah.
bet you that his parents, they understood each other's attachment styles and they knew how to react when they got into, things, disagreements, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Both of his parents are pretty wise, folks. And so I was just like, man, you should have been soaking up all these gems. Like, but sometimes it's not like that. Like, I feel like women ask more questions. So usually, when there's something you need to know, it's like, ask your mom. I don't know, or, ask your aunt, I have to ask my aunt because, this is and that, she'll have more of a track record of that history or those pictures or whatever it is. Um, I see that a lot when I'm like, you never asked your parents about XYZ or why they named you this and where your grandparents were from or anything. And they're like, well,
They're
no,
like, nah.
so I'm like, oh, okay, So I had to learn. I learned that over time too. That just how different we are, as men and women. So
Hmm.
yeah, sometimes you gotta, insist on one end. So okay, what's the next attachment style we want to touch?
So the next one went over anxious, carousel, avoidant. So avoidant attachment style. This is the person that's like, come closer, come closer. Okay, too close. Back up a little bit. So this is the
Mm.
person that likes the closeness, but not too much. They like to keep people at an arm's length. These are the
Oh.
people who enjoy like the beginning parts of falling in love. They love those little like special moments where you go on a date and you have that great time and you giggle and laugh together and that honeymoon period basically. They love
Mm.
that. But then when it comes down to the deeper relationship, back. I don't want you
Mm.
that close.
It's like the
So
tease, the
those
tease style, huh?
yeah, yes, it is. So basically, in relation, well, let's go back to their childhood. So
Mhm.
their parents were, whether or not they were consistent, and didn't really matter because they were emotionally unavailable. These were the
Mm.
people whose parents told them to man up or woman up. We don't want to
Mm.
see that emotion. They didn't talk about emotion. They didn't say, I love you. They didn't,
Mm.
I love you kind of thing.
Right.
It
Okay.
was implied, not necessarily spoken. So is it really no? That
Hmm.
kind of thing. So
Hmm.
in relationships, they will use strategies to distance themselves in relationships. So these people are like
Hmm.
your people who are at work 8 to 12 hours a day, 5 days a week,
Right.
and they only have to interact with their partner a few hours a day. So
Right.
these are the people who like that closeness, but just they'll never really form that really intimate relationship. They won't allow themselves to get that deep.
Okay, so they avoid the connection. They don't let you get in too deep. They're like, yeah, we can hang out, but I'll never open all the way up. You're not going to be able to get inside.
Mm-hmm. And those are the people that nitpick. Those are the ones that nitpick at you,
Oh,
like they analyze your face. They're like waiting for you to do something, slip up. Like, why'd you say
really?
that way? Or, like, what did you mean by that? Those kind of sentences,
Oh,
because they're just
interesting.
waiting for you to be like, they're waiting for a conflict so they can just kind of push away from you.
So they can have an
Yeah,
excuse of why to check out.
exactly, exactly.
Okay. In the beginning of that, I was thinking about J Lo because you were just saying like they love the beginning stages, and they always talk about J Lo is like she loves to fall in love, but like it always ends up
Mm-hmm.
not working out like later. And I love my J
Well, hey, I don't know J Lo, but what you just described, was the beginnings of an avoidant
Lo.
attachment
Oh,
styles.
okay, okay. And so then there was that fourth one that's kind of ambiguous, or
Yeah, the one that has all the different names.
okay.
In my research, throughout undergrad, it was anxious avoidant, but this is the
Mm.
person who, very small portion of the population, their parents were just not there at all,
Oh, okay,
positive or
okay.
negative. They just didn't have the social interaction that they needed during very critical times in their development, basically.
Mm.
They knew that they had to meet their own needs by themselves. So they learned how to self-soothe. Those are the people as adults who are very independent,
Mm.
very self-sufficient, because they knew their needs were not going to be met. So they learned how to meet their own needs at a very early age.
Hmm.
And those are the people who don't care if you say, hey, I'm going to leave you because you're not discussing any of these problems with me and I'm out of here. And they're like, bye. I don't
Right.
care. They're very good at acting like they don't care.
Now, are they
Those are
not
the
emotionally attached either? Because I feel like I don't know if you've ever had a friend like this or like someone who's in your life and it's just they're good friends and good people and they care for you, but like they're if something is going on and it's emotional, like something bad happened, they're just like straight face, like, you know, man,
flat
that's
affected.
too bad,
Nothing bothers me.
Yeah, like they care, but you can't see it, like you don't know because they're so like just dry and like unattached and
Mm-hmm.
someone passed and they're like, oh man, like yeah, her parent passed, she's going through a tough time, but they just don't no emotion. Like even when you call them and tell them you're like, oh wow, like I'm so sorry to hear that. Like real monotone, you're like, do you feel anything? So that's
Yeah,
kind of
and
hard.
that sounds like a very extreme case, but yes, that's a definite that definitely falls under this category, but that's a
Mhm.
very extreme reaction. And to say
Yeah.
this, all of these different attachment styles, they're a spectrum. So, you may be on the lower end, you may be on the higher end. It's all
Mhm.
about the different variations in the population. But yes,
Right.
those are the people that they just don't, they'd rather deal with it by themselves. So
Mm.
I bet you whoever you reference, they were stone faced in front of you, and then when they got home, waterworks, or
Mm.
unhealthy coping mechanisms, alcoholism, drug abuse,
Yeah, that's
excessive
interesting.
shopping, gambling, all these vices that we have, those are the ways that people use to cope with those types of relationships.
Right.
um, they are also nitpicky. So, oh, everything's great. That partner, potential partner, has great personality, has a great
Mm.
job, has a great family, has a great everything. But I don't like that extra part he put in his hair, or like that. I didn't like that. So that person is completely just out of the running. Those are
Oh,
the
wow.
people that do that. Yes. Um,
That's funny.
yeah. So, but see, this is the thing too. Those people want love. They want it,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
they don't
definitely. Definitely.
have the tools to receive or to give love, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely like a friend, but um yeah, they said that they don't know how to react in those kind of like, situations. So they just sit there. And so it's just like, well, that's okay, like, but then again, you don't have to be, but it's good to be kind of flexible and understanding, because we're not all the same. And if you get someone who doesn't understand that, is not open to try to understand, they will think like, oh, you just don't love me, and this person
Right.
loves you like, to the moon and back, but you'll take it like they don't love you because you're used to a person who's expressive. And so we're dealing with the person who's not expressive and they're like a stone wall. You're like, oh, maybe I guess they're like, I can take or leave you,
Right.
and that can cause an insecurity in a person who, has their attachment style but is not like open to learn about anyone else, I guess, style.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, and
okay.
I think one of the things that, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of the show, when you're like working on yourself before you work with other, like in relationships. But
Yeah,
when we're
definitely.
talking about attachment styles, attachment is something that happens in the space between people. It's not an
Mm.
individual thing, it is a collective thing. So once you get
Mm.
yourself together, you're going to have to work. It's like a dance. The scientist that I
That's the
recently
extra
heard
work.
described it. It's like a dance. Yes, it's that extra work because you have to
Mhm.
find the ways that your partner is triggered. You have to find the ways that your partner, say they're anxious, right? So they need that constant reassurance, and they're with
Right,
someone who's avoidant. So that person needs to take like preemptive measures, like, hey, sending that text, hey, I'm going to be a little late today because I have this happening. So just
right.
kind of doing different things to kind of accommodate that attachment style. It's a dance. You
No,
don't want to
that's
step on
really
each
good.
other's toes.
No, that's really good. And that's what, since you mentioned that or brought that up, it makes me think of how some folks are, they don't want to deal with that stuff, that trauma. And so they hate hearing, oh, everybody's
Mm-hmm.
talking about mental health. Everybody, thinks that they're a therapist. Everybody's saying this work that you need to do, and you need to do this self work. And then they say, but there's work that you have to do with a person. Like, how do you know that you're really doing it if you're not with anyone? But that's to the what your point that you just made, that there's that work that you do on your own. And then once you've done your work and you're with someone else, attached to someone else in some kind of way, you have to learn their what they got going on, like how they work.
Right.
And
Right.
people just, I feel like they just don't want to do all the work. They're like, no, I want it to be just ready made. And it's like, no, it don't
Mm-mm.
work like that. If it did, we would all be happy. We'd be
Exactly.
happy
And
and
think about
thriving.
your friendships. Think about friendships you have. You don't
Right,
just ready made, here's your best friend, right?
right,
You
exactly.
learn how to navigate things with each other. You know what sets that person off. You know how to calm that person down because you get
Mhm.
to know someone. And
Right,
you don't do that by yourself.
right,
You do that with someone. So, and
right.
that also goes to like when you're having problems in your relationship, when you're having fights in your relationship, like people automatically are like, I'm activated, so I got to go by myself and go self-soothe and get that
Mm.
alone time, and then we can talk about it. Yeah, that's a good thing to have, but you
Mhm.
also have to do that work where you talked about what happened together, what triggers, what did we need,
Right.
what do we need to do in the future.
Understand. Yeah.
Yeah, people get really caught up in the details of different fights, and I am one of those because I said this, I didn't say that, or whatever. I'm really good at that, but it's not the detail. When we're
Yeah.
talking about attachment, we're talking about the meaning behind whatever it is they did, whatever meaning they ascribe to whatever behavior
Mm.
activated them. So all of that stuff is something you can't do by yourself. You have to
Right.
do it with other people.
Right, right. And so, yeah, I'm glad that we got to like break that down because, and then, there's just so many different things. You have like when it's your friend, you let your friend get away with certain stuff, but then you get in a relationship,
Right.
you're like, oh, why didn't you, you said you were going to call me back, but you didn't call me back. But your friends, you might be irritated if your friend says they're going to call you back, but they don't. But what you don't, you don't harbor it. You may call your friend, be like, you said you're
Right.
gonna call me back, girl, or whoever, dude. we need to get
Right.
on the same page with this. Are we gonna go in business? Whatever. But you'll get a little bit irritated, but you don't like have that I'm gonna cut you off because you didn't call me back. But you would do that if it was like a relationship. You're like,
Exactly.
oh, well, you said this and
Yeah,
then you didn't do it, and
exactly.
yeah,
And
so
think about relationships with your coworkers too. Any relationship, to some
mhm.
degree, you're displaying your attachment style.
Right. You're right. You're totally right. So can either well, let me see. So what's the difference between attachment styles and attachment disorders?
Oh, so attachment styles are, again, basically what we just talked about,
Right.
different variations, normal variations in the population, right? But when
Hmm.
we're talking about attachment disorders are, they're defined in the DSM-5. So I'm sure if you're familiar with psychology, you know about the DSM. That's the manual that psychologists use to
Okay.
diagnose different mental illnesses. Now,
Okay.
me being a school psychologist, I don't use the DSM. So, disclaimer, I don't use the DSM. I use the Ed Code, the Educational Code of
Mm.
California, to make decisions
Oh,
around
okay.
student
Okay.
outcomes. But that being said, I do have my undergrad in psychology, and I've been interested my whole life. So I am familiar with the two different attachment disorders in the DSM.
Mm-hmm.
There's reactive attachment disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's disinhibited social engagement disorder. So
Oh.
those are the two, yeah, the big fancy words, right?
Yeah,
But
that last one, it was just like,
but
ooh, what's that?
but once I describe it, you will see like, oh, I know, and then you're gonna
Right.
be like, oh, this person has that DESD, and that person has DESD. So somebody with both of these are similar to attachment styles in that they are outcomes of things that happened in our past, whether it's
Mm,
traumatic or not, just things that happened during our developmental period and how they affect the way we function as adults, right? But when we're
okay.
talking about reactive attachment disorder, we're looking at someone who is very, 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 um, they're like, they basically have problems with everything. They don't want to
Mm,
interact with anyone at all,
mm,
or they'll have one person that they're very, very, very attached to, right? So
okay.
they have a resistance to commitment as adults. And then they're constantly thinking, like, is that person going to leave me? So that hypervigilance, that
Mhm.
anxious type, this is like a very extreme version of that. This person
Oh, gotcha.
um,
Gotcha.
is obsessive. They're the ones that call you 37 times a day. Those are the ones who
Mm.
tend to be abusive or aggressive. If I can't have you, no one can. Those kind of
Because
things. So,
they develop a level of insecurity along with that because obviously
mm-hmm,
they're always afraid someone's going to leave or they don't trust anything.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I can see
Exactly.
that.
And again,
Okay.
they're motivated by harm avoidance. They don't want to get hurt by that person because they've been hurt by so many people in the past. But this is, again,
Mm,
a diagnosed uh, thing, and it's a very small portion of the population. So it's to an
okay.
extreme degree. Those things
Extreme.
that I
Okay.
mentioned, they happen, but to an extreme degree, you're going to have reactive attachment disorder. So the
Gotcha.
disinhibited social engage, oh, yes, almost like fatal attraction. Yes, yes, absolutely. When we're talking about disinhibited engagement disorder, social engagement disorder, excuse me, this is the person that's all over the place. They're the ones that are in and out of relationships. They're very indiscriminate in their relationships. They're the ones
Mm,
that have the boyfriend one week, the girlfriend next week, the girlfriend next week, the boyfriend the week after. And they're
mm.
just not selective when it comes to forming
Oh.
relationships. They're also avoiding intimate relationships, but in a different way. Instead of kind of just
Uh,
sticking to one person or sticking by themselves,
they're just
they're
like
all
pile
over.
them on, so I don't have to connect with anyone. Okay.
Exactly, exactly.
And
And
what is this one called again? Say it again, because I for
it's called disinhibited social engagement disorder.
that's why I think
So
I just shut down after I'm like, how many words is it? Like,
it's a lot. It's a lot. And again, people who are clinicians and clinical school psychologists, they know this stuff like the back of their hand. I'm just giving you
mm,
my
yeah,
rough draft undergrad
it's
knowledge
cool.
of it.
It's good.
But yeah, either way, they're extremes of the same thing. You're just trying to avoid having
Mhm,
that up close and personal relationship with someone. So
mm,
those are the differences between the disorders. There's only
mm,
two of them,
mhm.
and they're diagnosed by a mental health professional, whereas attachment styles are variations in the population.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So, how would you say that personal accountability helps us conquer our trauma? Because a lot of times, you'll hear those straight shooters that will tell you, um, to tell you the truth, it's your choice of how it is that you're going to move forward, and it's your choice a lot of times, like you choose. And some people get very, very triggered by that, because they're like, oh, so you mean to tell me that this happened to me because it was my fault, or I chose that? And it's just like, well, maybe not when you were a child and something happened to you, but when you get an adult, 30 years pass and you're still choosing to do certain things, and using that as an excuse, you're choosing it. But that's a
Right.
hard, tough pill, for people to swallow. Sometimes you have to be at a place to handle that. But how does how do you believe that personal accountability, can help us conquer that trauma?
Oh, goodness. Well, personal accountability is very important. But I think the first step is self-awareness, right? Because you can't hold
Hmm.
yourself accountable if you're not aware of the ways that you're navigating and the ways your behavior affect others, right? So
Right.
as soon as you're self-aware, and one little fun fact about this whole thing is just knowing the attachment styles, just being aware of the attachment styles
Hmm.
is positively correlated with better relational outcomes. So even
Nice.
you just being
Yeah.
aware of this, even the people who are listening to this right now already have better relational outcomes because they're aware of the different attachment styles. So
Right. They're
and
like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
back to personal accountability, I think the accountability falls into that work we were talking about earlier. It is not easy. It's not easy to work on yourself. It's not easy to work past personal trauma because again, if we were able to easily work past it, we wouldn't have alcoholics and we wouldn't have, people who are violent or all these other things, right? So
Hmm.
we're all on our individual path trying to do better every day, I hope, right? So
Yeah.
um self-awareness, definitely self-advocacy is something that's also very important
Mm.
because once you're aware of who you are and what attachment style you have and all these, and you're aware of how you fit in relationships, now you have to advocate for yourself too, right? Because again, it's
Mm.
like a dance. You don't want to step over anyone's step on anyone's toes when you're trying to build this relationship. But
Right.
I think it also goes back to like the different disorders that are related to these things. Trauma, just trauma in particular, is they're related to depression and anxiety, right? And so
Mhm,
is
mhm, mhm.
a different when you have an unhealthy attachment style. So most
Yeah.
people do have to work through one of those two things or both of those things before they're able to move forward with other things. Now it's really
Right.
hard to do, right? But
Mhm,
I'm a big proponent of mindfulness. I did my thesis on mindfulness years ago, and I
mhm.
still try to, when I have time, practice what I preach and have a mindfulness like meditation moment for myself.
Yeah.
But one of the
It really
things that
helps.
that does,
Mhm,
it does help because one of the things that does is it keeps you right here in the present mind, right? Because
mhm,
we're
mhm.
thinking about things that happened in our past.
Right.
Those things are correlated with depression. And
Right.
then when we're worried about things that happen in the future, those things are correlated with anxiety, right? So
Right. That's
if you're
okay.
in the middle, if you're right in the middle and you're focused on the present moment, you can't be depressed about the past because you're focused on the present moment. You can't be anxious about the future because you're focused on the present moment. And
Mhm.
those are good tools to have, but they're a part of a toolbox that you
Right.
need. And,
Mhm.
and that includes you being able to do the work, you recognizing that maybe your partner is avoidant. So I need to maybe give him space and maybe not be all up on
Mhm,
him when it's
mhm.
time, when he has a long day or something. Or
Right.
if my partner is, anxious, then maybe I should send that extra text message, even though I feel it's unnecessary. I know that it's efficient for
Right.
me to do this and I can avoid different things later. So
Mm.
self
Good.
accountability and self awareness and self advocacy are all things that go into that. Yes.
Nice. 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 So, Uh, here we are, about to looking at the same question. Now I really love that because I feel like it's so important. It just made me think of The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's so powerful, how things can shift and your life can transform just being present, because we're always on that go. And, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like sometimes it's designed that way, for us to be so busy that we don't even give ourselves that time that we need, to just focus on like me. How do I feel like right now?
Mm-hmm.
Not worried about, what's going to happen or what happened
Mhm.
before and holding on to this. Like you're not, being present, like what's going on now, because you can't really change either one, the past or the future.
That's
Um,
right.
Not really, but but you know what I mean.
Well, you
Um,
can't change the past. You can change the future, but you
you can
can't change
change
the
it.
past. And
Yeah.
dwelling on it is not going to help you in the future. That's for sure.
Right. And that's what I mean is as far as not changing the future, but you can't change the future right now. You can
Right.
change it by, how it is that you, you know, interpret things, as you grow and work on yourself, then yeah, you can change what may happen in the future, but you can't change what's going on 3 years from now. I mean,
Right.
what's happening, 3 years from now, because you're not there. So it's
Right.
like, don't worry about
Exactly.
that. um, so the next question is, what is, oh, why? I'm sorry. Why is it important to identify your attachment styles? It kind of talked about like different things that you need to do dealing with other people based on their attachment styles. But why is it important for you to identify your own attachment style?
Well, I think it's important just because you're going to be aware of your triggers. You're going to be aware of
Mhm.
where you're unreasonable, right? Because you'll be
Mhm.
able to look at your behavior in an objective way. It's a nice
Right.
framework that you can use to move
Mm,
towards more secure relationships. Um, you
perfect.
just got to check yourself. That's all it is. Check yourself individually, and then check yourself when you're with people, and just find out what that's it's more about finding out what that person needs in that moment. You know what
Right.
I
I
mean?
love
What does my partner need in that moment? And even if I feel like it's unnecessary, even if I feel a certain way about it, that's what they need. And what you need to project is somebody that you're safe here with me. I
that.
love
Right.
you. I'm not
Mhm.
going to leave you. No matter what this conversation comes up with, unless it's like something super severe.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. And so you
I
just
like
kind of
that.
have to approach things in that way. Um, there are ways, and there are a ton of quizzes online. There are a ton of books you can read, like you were talking about before we
Mhm.
started with the FedEx and all the cool books they
Yeah.
have in there,
How's
right?
it go?
There's a lot of books that will help you, and quizzes that will help you identify your own attachment style if you couldn't
Mhm.
figure it out from just
Mhm.
hearing the descriptions. You might be oblivious, and it'll
Right.
also help you with finding your partner's attachment styles too. And this
Right.
might be something you're doing, you're not even thinking about doing. See, I've been in a relationship for a really long time, and I wasn't a psychologist the whole time. I wasn't aware of attachment styles the whole time. But
Mm.
looking back on how we, dealt with each other
Okay.
after fights or whatever, you start to realize, like, wow, we were doing this work. There's a name
Mhm.
for the work we were doing. Who knew? But
Right.
it's not easy, definitely not.
Right.
But
It's
just
never going to be easy.
it'll definitely facilitate things if you do know.
Right. But it can get better, when you do the work.
Mm.
So, the last question is, can your attachment style change? I thought that
Oh
one was
yeah, definitely. Humans are fluid.
yeah.
You can
Yeah.
change anytime you want to, as long
Right.
as you just have to make that constant, make that work towards that goal, and
Mhm.
hit every step along the way and do the hard work. But anybody is capable of having a more secure attachment style.
Yeah, I actually I was, I always get all into the topics that I have because I'm like, I want to make sure I know a little something too,
It's
not just
good.
kind of like lost in it. But I believe I had took something down or some notes on that. Oh, what I found online. That was one of the questions too. And they stated that, yeah, the good news is that your attachment style can change over time. They said, although it's slow and difficult. So obviously,
Hard
because
work.
it's the hard work, right? You got to get
Yep.
stretched, and when you stretch, it hurts. When you grow, it
Hmm.
hurts. You get those body aches and stuff like that because you're growing. So it's gonna hurt a little. So slow and difficult, but it says research shows that an anxious or avoidant who enters a long-term relationship with a secure can be raised up to the level of the secure over an extended period of time. So it's
Yes.
pretty good. That's
Yes.
okay. You
And
got
to add, to that, yeah, if they enter into a romantic relationship with a secure person, but even the
growth.
person, if they don't get everything they need from their partner, or their partner's not
Mhm.
necessarily secure or secure type, they
They
can
can do work.
surround themselves with people who are
Mhm.
secure, friendships.
Yeah.
And a friend group that is secure will definitely help you with that. And I'm not talking about the people like the yes men in your life where you call and
Mhm.
they're like, girl, he tripping today. And your friend's like, oh, well, how dare he do that? And blah, blah, blah. And they're on
Right.
their side every time. No, the
Right.
person that's like, oh, you're saying this, but didn't he just like, cook this dinner for you? And like, wasn't the
Mhm.
whole house clean and you came home and you were so happy? So those kind of people that remind, that are real, that are grounded
They
in
keep you
realistic.
balanced. Yeah, they
Yes.
bring
Yeah.
you
They're
back to
grounded
the
in realism.
center.
Yes.
It makes that actually made me think of my first lady at my church. We had this open discussion, and it was just like young adults and singles, and it was really good. It was just a really good session. One of the ladies, she had a question about her being a single mom and having boys, and so the feedback was like, she was just like, well, what do I do? Because I want, I'm not married at this time. Helpful to a lot of people. Thank you. Thank you, Mama.
Great comments.
um, and so she was just, trying to figure out how does she maneuver that, because she wants to make sure that she prepares her, her sons for success. And, she's down because she's, raising them by herself. But she's just like, is there anything, what can she do? And so the first lady, she made a great point about surrounding yourself around people who can give your child what they need. Yes, you may not be in a relationship, but maybe you have some friends, some church members who
Mhm.
have, a healthy relationship, and, a husband, in the house, that wouldn't mind, like taking him along with some of the boys, for, just things that you do with your dad,
Yeah.
type
Yeah,
thing, or
absolutely.
coach, that you like the way that, what type of man that coach is. So then you just put your child around it. So even though they may not have it 100%, they're getting it and they're seeing it. And that's all they need.
Yes.
Because,
Yes.
like what Macho said, he said, you got to see something to be something, and
That's right.
that's how, people are. If they never see it, they don't know that they could have a good life or have those kind of
Right.
relationships, or so yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And kids may not grow up with that in their household, but as long as they're exposed to it early on,
Yeah,
then and they know that it exists, they can employ those strategies in the future, definitely. So the church is a great, great place for that.
I did that. We
Definitely.
nephews. Yeah. No, absolutely. I appreciate that. You saying that. And I tell that to, guys that I know all the time, and just people who ask me questions for advice and different things like that. Like the good men that I know, I tell them like, make sure that you, do that, because we are all connected, and we impact each other whether we like to believe it or not. And so it's so important. It's not enough just for you to be a good man or be a good woman. You got to like pay, you don't have to, we get to pay it forward, and be
Yes.
that, example for someone, because sometimes that's all that they need. Like I said, seeing it,
Yes.
to be it. And when they see you push through and be an awesome man and follow your dreams and things like that, they're able to start believing in themselves. They're like, well, maybe it's
Right.
possible for me too. And when you pour, into your brother, like you are what is it, your brother's keeper and your
Brother's
sister's keeper.
keeper. Yep.
Yeah. And so that you have your personal accountability, and then that community, I mean, what is it, that accountability for your community as well,
Hmm.
because of us being all
Yes.
connected. Yeah.
And even in school psychology, one of our
Mhm.
ethical duties is to become practicum supervisors, internship supervisors, so we can pass the profession on. That's a part
Mentor.
of
Yeah.
your responsibility. Yes, and I'm glad that you said sister's keeper, and you said
Mhm.
being a great woman too, because a lot of emphasis is on our young boys, but our young
Mhm.
women also need a lot of guidance,
Oh
especially when it
yeah.
comes to healthy relationships,
Oh
modeling
girl,
what
heartbreak.
is to be, yes,
Yeah.
how do people talk to you?
Mhm.
How do people treat you? What's acceptable? What are acceptable ways to be treated? Those types of
Mhm.
things. So yeah,
Yeah.
we do have a responsibility to the younger generation for sure.
Yeah, well, this was such an awesome show. I feel like there's a lot of nuggets in there. I have to go back and check it out, as well. Just listen to it again because it's just so good and so many different points that we touched on. And I think that this conversation has to keep happening. We did a show a while back, and it was like a raw talk with and it was about trauma. But it was I had a young lady. I mean a woman on who talked. She was a an identity trauma therapist, and so she
Mm,
focused on a lot with identity, and people who have identity issues, and how that correlates with the trauma. So it was really good. But we have to. I know we're not comfortable with the word. Sometimes the word alone is triggering for people, but we have to kind of move that out of the way and do it if we want to have a quality life.
right.
You just have to, I mean, you just do. It's like, do you want a quality life or you just want your life to be, like this and be anxious all the time and just stressed out and depressed, about things? If there's something you can do about it, why not do it? You know?
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Nola, for being here this evening and, educating us a little bit. And I know we can't, get you as a personal psychologist because you work for the school district, so you got those contracts. But you were saying earlier a little bit about how if people need, they can reach out to their
Oh
school
yes.
psychologist.
Yes. So most schools have, and especially here in California, most schools have a ton of different social emotional supports available to students.
Mm,
School counselors, child welfare and attendance specialists, school social
mhm.
workers, tier two intervention therapists. There's all
Wow,
kinds of them.
I
So
didn't know
if
we
you're,
got all
yes,
that.
exactly. It's wonderful. It is. And depending on how many resources your school has, and
Mhm.
money, aka money, how much school
Yeah.
district your money has, you'll have a ton or you'll have a little bit. At
Right.
least you will have a school psychologist at every school. That
Mhm.
one person may be stretched out between multiple schools, but there is every school has a designated school psychologist. So if you're having any issues with social emotional well-being, or
Mhm.
you feel like your child has an attentional deficit, ADHD, autism, anything like that that
Mhm.
could be affecting their learning,
Mhm.
or if you just need any help for your own family, a school psychologist will be able to help you be connected to community resources that are out there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, I didn't know about all of the supports we had, and even just in the community where we grew up. It's
Mhm.
kind of a small now bigger city, but
Mhm.
there are a ton of resources available for families. So
Mhm.
yeah, just reach out to your school psychologist, and they'll get the ball rolling on helping you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for watching and supporting us tonight. Make sure you share this with, a loved one or a friend or coworker, someone who may need to hear a little bit more about this and get a better understanding for themselves or, just dealing with a partner or friend, loved one, whoever. Just share, share, share. And we will be back here in 2 weeks. So good night.
Night, everyone.